If you're like me, you're looking for joy and peace during the Christmas season. And today I want to talk about a part of the Christmas story that gives surprising insight into how we can find that joy and peace. And it's the story of the angels coming to the shepherds to announce that Jesus had been born. Here's part of the story. Now there were in the same country shepherds living out in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were greatly afraid. Then the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which will be to all people. For there is born to you this day, in the city of David, a Savior who is Christ the Lord." You can imagine what it would have been like for the shepherds out in the dark of night to suddenly be bathed with light and have this incredibly powerful message given to them. It would have been a night that lived in their memories vividly for the rest of their lives. The miraculous nature of the angels appearing to the shepherds is so striking that we might miss a really important idea in this story, which is why the angels came to shepherds in the first place. If Jesus were born today, you can imagine how all the important people and all the famous people would be falling all over themselves to be the ones to come to see baby Jesus, to be known to have been there. And no doubt there were people in that era who would have done everything they could to have been the first person there. And yet it was to these seemingly inconsequential shepherds that the angel came. And part of the message that we can get from that is that it is to parts of us that are not puffed up, that don't think of ourselves as big and important, that the Lord comes in our lives. Because when we're aware of our own importance, we block out the presence of the Lord's love and wisdom. It's the part of us that gets on with life, that is willing to help a friend in need, that is willing to stay awake during the dark times of life, that the angels are sent to in us. I grew up thinking about how wonderful and peaceful it would have been to be a shepherd out on a quiet night watching over your sheep. But that's not really the way it was. Those shepherds were watching their sheep because they knew that there were predators who might come and try to harm the sheep. They knew that there were people who might come and try to steal their sheep. So they were awake at night, alert to any possible threat to those sheep. And they stand for parts of us that are awake, that are alert to threat, to the tender parts of us. And I'm not talking here about the part that is tender because it feels hurt because you said something mean to me. I'm talking about the tender ideals and values that you hold deep in your inner being, the ideals that are perhaps so tender that you actually don't even want to share them with anyone else. These are the principles and ideals of who we want to become as spiritual beings. We read in the 23rd Psalm about how the Lord guides these sheep-like parts in us. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The image here is of the way the Lord keeps us safe when we strive for what is good. And the shepherd part of us is the part that similarly keeps watch over those tender ideals and seeks to keep them safe. And this part is quite fierce. When David, who would later become king in Israel, offered to go and fight the giant Goliath, King Saul said, "You can't do that. You're a boy, and he's been a warrior since he was a boy." David's response is, "When I was out guarding the sheep and a bear came or a lion came, I met that animal." And he says, "I grabbed it by the beard and I killed it." So he faced these animals at close quarters. And because of that courage, Saul allowed him to go and fight Goliath. And of course, we know he won. So think of the courage that it took to stay awake at night, watching sheep, knowing that any moment you might have to face significant danger to keep those sheep safe. Think of the fierceness and the resolve in that. An image that comes to mind is of Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, standing on the bridge facing the Balrog saying, "You shall not pass." And we could think about what is the part in us that is willing to say to the forces of darkness, "You shall not pass, you will not hurt these tender ideals in me. They will grow, they will prosper." The angel comes to this fierce part of us because this is the part of us that really cares. This is the part that carries us through our spiritual night times. I remember talking to a mom who had a severely asthmatic child, and she was recounting how she hadn't slept more than a few catnaps for the last 3 nights because her son was having asthmatic episodes, and she was aware that if she wasn't awake with him all night, he might die during the night. And you can think about that fierce maternal love that drove her to stay awake through those nights because of her love for her child. And then you can think about the things in us that drive us to stay awake because of what we value. So my question to you is, what are your shepherd parts? What do you value enough? What do you stand for enough as a spiritual quality that you are willing to stay up in your night times? That you're willing to say, "I will not make one exception to this spiritual principle." What teachings from the Lord, what values are you willing to embody in that way? Now we know we're human beings, right? We're not going to ever be able to say, "I'm never going to do this again," and stick to it. What we're going to do is be in the effort to do that. Just like the shepherds, even when they stayed awake at night, but still sometimes lose sheep. We can't be perfect. But in the efforts to strive, we open up our spirits to the Lord, and that allows him to be born in our lives. So those shepherds were invited to come to the manger, to kneel, possibly to touch their God. The joy and the peace they experienced must have been exquisite. And isn't it beautiful to think that it is to the ordinary parts of us, to the parts that just get on with the job of being kind, of standing for what we value, that the Lord can be present. And their very ordinariness now all of a sudden looks a lot more heroic. So I'm inviting you to embrace that heroic part of you. The Lord invites us to experience him, to experience his joy and his peace. And that happens when we are willing to strive with all our might to hold up to some principle that he offers us. Because every truth he gives us is a part of himself. And as we take that truth in and try to live it, we bring him into our lives. I'm wishing you joy and peace this Christmas season as you strive to live out your convictions for how to be a loving person.